News! Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of a big rematch this upcoming weekend, Katie Taylor says, I don't know if women's boxing has the strength and depth to have 3-minute rounds. As I've told you in previous videos, not every female fighter is a big proponent of the change. I haven't actually got any preference either way, Taylor told the Associated Press. The 2-minute rounds are a real fast pace. They say the 3-minute rounds will cause more knockouts, but I don't think that's true. I don't know if women's boxing has the strength and depth to have 3-minute rounds, really. For me, I really don't care whether it's a 2-minute round or a 3-minute round. I spar 3-minute rounds all the time. There's pros and cons to both, really. I'll tell you this much, that if this weekend's fight were for 12 3-minute rounds, that really wouldn't favor Katie Taylor as the older fighter
and naturally smaller fighter. You don't notice it at first. It's not that Chantel is so much taller and longer than Katie, it's that she's beefier than Katie, and when both fighters rehydrate on the night, she'll be the heavier fighter with the heavier hands.
Saw it the first time out. Difference in size, slight difference in size, but a noticeable difference in power. Katie's punches as opposed to Chantel's.
12 3-minute rounds for Katie Taylor wouldn't do Katie any favors. The change isn't uniform. It's not yet widespread. Amanda Serrano has been the most vocal.
If Katie Taylor pulls a rabbit out of a hat this weekend and becomes a 2-time, 2-weight undisputed champion, if she tries to revisit the Amanda Serrano fight thereafter, that's going to be a sticking point for Amanda. Amanda's going to want it for 12 3-minute rounds, which favors Amanda Serrano's style a lot more than it favors Katie. Katie, God bless her, in her storied amateur and professional career, she's getting long in the tooth. She's older than Amanda and older than Chantel, who she's about to fight. The added time would wear on her energy reserves a lot harder than it would somebody else.
Somebody younger.
12 3-minute rounds aside and impending changes to the sport of women's boxing as it pertains to Katie Taylor in a general sense. If she wins this weekend, I think she should wrap it up. I think she should retire. She's 37 years old. She's already had a storied amateur career and professional career. If she becomes a 2-time undisputed champion, she should retire on a high.
Retire from the sport on your own terms, and don't let the sport retire you. Most don't really like Katie's chances.
They don't like her chances in this second fight. We'll talk more about that in another video. As it pertains to Katie's comments on 12 3-minute rounds, not all female boxers are as big proponents of 12 3-minute rounds as Amanda Serrano. Sky Nicholson.
She likes 10-2s. She likes things the way they are. 10-2s lend themselves to the fast, action-packed pace women's boxing has become associated with. Very few lulls in the action. Some would say the rounds end too quickly.
Some others would say the fast pace makes it that much more entertaining and that much more marketable. The underlying theory behind 12 3-minute rounds is it could lead to more knockouts, which then could make the sport more marketable.
But Katie feels that the sport does not yet have enough depth for 12 threes to be uniform. Depth in terms of talent, depth in terms of...
Is it depth in terms of density she's referring to? That some of these divisions are more densely populated than some others. It is true in the sport of women's boxing, the lower you go, the deeper the talent pool becomes. But the higher you go, it gets pretty thin up there at 160, 168, and 175.
She didn't say it outright, but you get the sense reading Katie's comments that she doesn't actually feel the change is necessary.
My thoughts. It's not necessary to make them 12 threes instead of 10 twos to make them more entertaining. They're already pretty entertaining as it is. These are entertaining fights, entertaining fighters, and charismatic characters, so it's not necessary.
The fights don't need to be longer in order to be entertaining. They're already entertaining.
They don't necessarily need to be longer to result in highlight reel knockouts. I've seen plenty of 10-2s, 10-2 fights that ended in violent knockouts. There are some violent knockout punchers floating around out there. It's just that the boxing community at large, they're not familiar with them yet.
So it's not necessarily a need. The fights don't need to be longer in order to result in knockouts, and the fights don't need to be longer in order to be entertaining fights. It's not a need.
It's a helping effort more than anything else, and it could, at least in theory, it could help things along, but what I see is that it's not unanimous. It's not across the board. Not everyone wants 12 threes instead of 10 twos.
Since it's not unanimous and not everyone is asking for this change in and of itself may move slowly.
In men's heavyweight news, thinking about the upcoming Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker fight on the big December show in Saudi, and what it means, what it could mean moving forward, it almost feels like Deontay Wilder has been operating in a heavyweight division separate
from everyone else. That is, up until he locked horns with Tyson Fury, and we know what happened.
Considering that Deontay Wilder, coming out of the Olympics, was a bronze medalist, but for the first 7 years of his career, he didn't cross paths with any of the who's who players in the heavyweight division at that time. That's a bit unusual for an Olympian. You expect better, but that's how things went for Wilder in the first 7 years of his career before he eventually fought Bermane Stiverne, then WBC champion, for the WBC title. And we know what the years thereafter consisted of. The whole Joshua versus Wilder thing, the back and forth, this offer versus that one.
What seems like ancient history now are still talking points that fight fans argue about here today, making this fight with Joseph Parker, a former champion like Deontay Wilder.
Deontay Wilder became WBC champion in 2015. Joseph Parker did it a year later in 2016, after Tyson Fury vacated all the titles that he won in the Klitschko fight. The WBO title went vacant, and Joseph Parker contested for that title against the then unbeaten Andy Ruiz. Won a narrow points decision,
and successfully defended the title 2 times before losing it to Anthony Joshua. The significance of this fight.
This fight, like Anthony's upcoming fight with Otto Wallin, is intended to be a prelude before a showdown between them, before a showdown between Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, the former heavyweight champions. And how Wilder performs against Joseph Parker, even this version of him, is of some significance.
Deontay Wilder is thought of in many circles as being a better fighter than, say, a Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce, the only man to stop Joseph Parker. He was the first one to do it.
Although Deontay is still thought of as being a more dangerous and volatile puncher than Joe Joyce, he is still a very different fighter than Joe Joyce. And Joe is the only man to have ever stopped Joseph Parker. How did he do it? Punches and bunches. That was the ticket for Joe Joyce. Throwing punches and bunches until he eventually wore down and wore out Joseph Parker. When you look at Wilder, he's the opposite of a volume puncher. Wilder looks to do the job with a single punch, and he spends the entirety of a round looking to land that single punch.
Over a year removed from the sport, and having only fought for 1 round, a single round, in the last 2 years, what's his timing going to be like with that right hand? Because he relies on timing in order to land it.
His sharpness, his reflexes. How is all of that holding up for Deontay Wilder, who's fast approaching 40 years old, having only boxed for a single round in the last 2 years? He'll be facing a younger man with a lower center of gravity, a somewhat shorter, stumpier fighter with better balance and better coordination.
Even if he doesn't have as much power as Wilder, does he need as much power as Wilder to hurt Deontay Wilder? There are still unanswered questions when it comes to Deontay after those 2 consecutive losses to Tyson Fury.
What's his punch resistance like after those 2 fights? We thought we'd find out in the Robert Helenius fight, but it didn't last long enough for us to find out.
You know, I've never thought that Wilder takes a good punch.
But we thought of him as being somewhat chinny, based on what happened to him at the hands of Harold Sconeers many years ago in the early stages of his career, how he came very close to being knocked out by a short, stocky journeyman, and how he reacted to Eric Molina's left hook after walking into it, how his knees buckled and he was rattled by Eric Molina, who's not known for power, not known as being all that big a puncher. Joseph Parker isn't known as being all that big a puncher, but does he need to be to hurt today's Deontay Wilder? What makes this fight intriguing?
Wilder's almost 40 years old. He's only boxed for 1 round in the last 2 years, and we don't know what this guy's punch resistance, reflexes, timing is like at this point.
Maybe asking yourself, well, why is all the focus on Wilder? What about Joseph Parker? What about him? Well, Joseph Parker's not the one with the reputation. Joseph Parker's not the one with all the hyperbole that surrounds him about how he's one of the greatest all-time punchers, one of the greatest heavyweights that ever lived.
You won't find an army of overzealous fans arguing in defense of Joseph Parker, but you will find an army of overzealous fans arguing in defense of Deontay Wilder and how fucking great he is.
He is great. Better look great against Joseph Parker, because I don't actually think he's a better boxer than Joseph Parker. He may be a bigger puncher.
Defensively, I don't think he's better, more coordinated, more balanced. He certainly isn't more active. Joseph Parker has been boxing in the last 12 months.
He's about 7 years younger than Deontay Wilder. Deontay's 38, whereas Joseph is 31. They've both been stopped at least once, though Wilder's been stopped more times than Joseph.
Wilder's weak on the inside. If Joseph can get inside on this guy, he can cause a lot of damage.
Saw Tyson Fury beat him from the inside out, smothering him, forcing his weight onto his back foot. Wilder's no good. He's no good on the back foot. Joseph Parker, if he minds the right hand, slips, rolls, and rides his way, bobs and weaves his way on the inside, he can hurt Wilder there, so long as he doesn't get caught.
Can Wilder catch him? Does he still have the timing to do it at 38 years old, so sparsely active in the last 2 years? That's what makes this fight intriguing. Must-see TV.
If Wilder is to live up to the reputation set before him, he has to. He has to catch him, because if he doesn't, he could be in big trouble.
We'll talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches.
As it pertains to another heavyweight fighting on that same show with Deontay and Joseph Parker, Anthony Joshua, in reference to him, former champion and Hall of Fame inductee turned analyst Carl Froch said, "I saw a beaten down man on the edge. I don't want to go into mental health problems, but to me, he's a man on the edge of something. I've no confidence of him jumping in there with Wilder, Fury, or Usyk. That should be his aim, but to me, he just looks worried."
I notice everybody's a lot quicker to psychoanalyze Anthony and not the other guys.
I do agree with Carl Froch when he says that Anthony seemed like he was on the edge at the kickoff press conference for the big Saudi Arabia show, though not necessarily for the same reasons that Carl suggests when you consider that he was surrounded by so many of his detractors. Dev Sani, Queensbury's resident mouthpiece, and Frank Warren, tack on Deontay Wilder, all their history, all that backstory, and Jarrell Miller there antagonizing him.
He did seem like a man on the edge. A man on the edge of losing it and punching somebody in the face, which I would think is expected, given the decorum.
It just seems like they're always looking for a reason to have this guy under a magnifying glass, but not those guys. Anthony was asked if he had ever fallen out of love with boxing, to which he responded, "No, it is consistent. I never had a year out, never had too much time off. I stood up to every opportunity. I fought back-to-back world champions, defended my titles. I'm a different breed. Who am I to compare myself to others? I am a different breed."
They're always looking for an excuse to put Anthony under a magnifying glass, but not everybody else. I mean, take what happened with Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou. Immediately after the fight, Fury skipped out on the post-fight press conference. It was canceled, essentially, so he wouldn't have to deal with the embarrassment, the embarrassing questions.
Because of how he performed, or underperformed, I should say. And what about Deontay Wilder and all the excuses, all the conspiracy theories that he came up with immediately after his first loss to Tyson Fury? He blamed anyone from Tyson Fury for glove tampering.
Said that in the first fight, Jack Reese should have counted out Tyson Fury, and he didn't, that the count was too long, so then they got Kenny Bayless for the second one, just for him to get knocked out in the second one. And after the second one, he said that Kenny Bayless is a crab-in-the-bucket referee.
Kenny Bayless, Tyson Fury, they were conspiring against him, as well as Mark Breland, who supposedly spiked his water, and don't forget that the costume was too heavy.
You never saw Anthony Joshua react this way to any of his losses, not the loss to Andy Ruiz or the losses to Alexander Usyk. For the most part, He took his losses like a man, but he's the one who's constantly under the magnifying glass, and not Wilder. Why aren't we questioning Wilder's mental stability?
Why aren't more people questioning his intestinal fortitude? And what about Tyson Fury's? Tyson Fury was in the hot seat. He was under the hot lights some years ago, and his response to that was to abscond, to run away from the BBBOC, run away from UCAT and their investigation, run away from all the people you offended, making those inflammatory comments. He hid away for 2 years, ran away like he ran away from the press conference after the Ngannou fight. But I don't see as many people questioning his mental faculties and his intestinal fortitude like they question Anthony's, who's never dodged his comeuppance in victory or defeat.
Carl Froch says that Anthony seemed like a man on the edge. You could say the same thing about Tyson Fury at the press conference for the Usyk fight as he shouted obscenities across the room.
You have to wonder if it were Anthony doing that, what would the reaction be? While we're psychoanalyzing everything he does, but not everybody else. I think his response, his demeanor at that press conference was everything you would expect. He is surrounded by his rivals and his detractors. I don't expect him to be in sunny spirits.
Surrounded by people that are constantly tearing him down, on top of the guy who he's about to fight, Otto Wallin.
It just seems to me that these psychoanalytical observations are far too lopsided and skewed as it pertains to the Otto Wallin fight. If what Anthony really wants is to send a message to his detractors, he needs to sharpen up, go in there, and stop this guy where Tyson Fury could not. You really can't make any excuses for it. This guy gave Tyson Fury all he could handle, and by all rights...
You saw what this guy did to Tyson Fury's face. He sliced it up. By all rights, if that were anyone other than Tyson Fury, that fight would have got stopped on cuts.
You want to send him a message, and all of his fans who just so happen to be your detractors, you stop Otto Wallin where Tyson Fury could not. You show him how it's done.
Take your frustrations out on that guy. Channel all your anger from the Wilder stuff, from the Miller stuff, from the Fury stuff, and all your detractors, and focus it
on the controlled demolition of Otto Wallin. Emphasis on control. Because that's who he's fighting in December. Wilder's got his own problems. We'll see how he makes out with Joseph Parker.
Joshua's got to take all his frustrations out on the man he has in front of him. And that man is Otto Wallin.
Because I notice this kid can't get a fair shake no matter what he does, and people play by a different set of rules when it comes to him versus everybody else. You can't help but be frustrated.
The kid's not a robot.